They thought she was a civilian contractor, another forgettable face in a base full of uniforms and ego, until someone finally opened the duffel she left behind in the hangar locker room. No name tag, just a faded patch stitched to the inside flap, a golden falcon gripping lightning bolts in its talons, and a letter folded beside it, yellowed with time, bearing a general's signature and 2 words scrawled in thick black ink. Let her lead. If you believe true strength doesn't need to shout, if you believe legends are often hiding in plain sight, like and subscribe. This is a story about the woman no one saw coming, and the briefing room that would never forget her. It was the kind of desert morning that baked the base before noon. Grit in your eyes, salt on your skin, and the kind of tension in the air that told even the cockiest pilot something was coming. Mission prep was underway in Hangar 4, where the A-10 crews gathered around cold maps and cold attitudes. Captain Reese was already there, smirking like always, legs kicked up on the edge of the table, spinning a pen between fingers that had signed off on more airstrikes than most in the room had seen deployments. That's when she walked in. No announcement. No salute. Just a tray of steaming coffee cups and a quiet presence that made every conversation die mid-sentence. She was in her late 20s, black boots laced neat, uniform pressed sharp, but her name tag was missing, and the only thing anyone clocked was the tray. Support must be getting younger, someone muttered. Reese chuckled, loud enough to get attention, and without looking up, he called out, "Hey, coffee girl, 2 sugars, right?" A few snickers. She said nothing, just placed cups on the table, one by one, like it was a sacred ritual. But when she set Reese's down, he finally glanced her way and froze. His eyes had landed on something that didn't belong, a patch on her sleeve. Not one any of them recognized. It was old, nearly vintage, tucked between modern insignia like it had no business being there. "That's a cute patch," he said, smirking. "Halloween come early?" She didn't flinch. Didn't answer, just turned to leave. But before she could reach the door, the colonel entered, and the shift in the air was immediate. He saw her and went rigid. Not confused, not surprised, just respectful. The kind of respectful that silences a room. At ease, he said to the others, but his eyes were still locked on her. "Gentlemen," the colonel continued, his voice steadier now. "This is Sergeant Major Arden Wolf. Retired. Recently reinstated." Every head turned. Reese blinked. Reinstated. The colonel nodded once. By presidential order. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. And for the first time in years, Reese didn't have a clever comeback. Arden gave a tight nod, then walked to the front of the room and placed her hand on the mission map. In a calm, surgical voice, she began adjusting the plan. Coordinates shifted. Assumptions were corrected. Every flaw she pointed out, she backed up with tactical logic that had Reese's face twitching like he was being lectured by a ghost from a war he hadn't even known happened. She wasn't just familiar with the area, they realized she had been there. Not as a tourist, not as support, as a shadow. And when Reese pushed back, his voice snide, questioning her data, she turned to him and recited his own mission logs from memory, including a friendly fire incident that had been sealed from his record. The colonel didn't stop her. No one did. "You missed the comms relay by 3 clicks, she said, voice level. 2 civilians died because your gut told you the UAV feed was wrong." Dead silence. Reese's face flushed, then drained. She returned to the map like nothing had happened. The rest of the team leaned in, some scribbling, some just watching. Because in that moment, the woman who'd been dismissed as coffee girl became something else entirely, a ghost with teeth. They learned more about strategy in that 1 hour than in the last 6 months of briefings, and by the end, no one cared where she came from. They just wanted to know what came next. After the room cleared, Reese lingered behind. He stared at her patch again, then said, not quite smug this time, "You're not what I expected." She finally looked him in the eye. "No," she replied. "I'm not what anyone expected. That's why I'm still alive." Outside, word spread. A few rookies started whispering her name like it was a myth. Arden Wolf. Some called her Falcon, others Ghost Wolf. She didn't correct any of them. She didn't care. She wasn't here for a nickname. She was here for a mission. And for the first time in years, maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Some stories don't need to be told. They bleed through the silence, drip from the cracks in someone's posture, and linger in the way a person scans every exit without even thinking. Arden Wolf never spoke about what happened in Kandahar, but the way she moved, like noise itself was a liability, told everyone with half a brain that she'd been somewhere louder than this. After the mission briefing, the air in Hangar 4 was different. The rookies sat straighter. The older pilots watched her like she might vanish into smoke. Reese, on the other hand, stewed in his own pride, flipping through flight logs he already knew by heart, refusing to admit he'd been outclassed. He told himself she was bluffing, some bureaucratic token, maybe plucked from a dusty file and propped up to check a box. But that theory cracked later that evening, when he wandered into the secure archives looking for old topography scans and found a restricted folder already unlocked. Her name was stamped across it. Wolf, Arden M., clearance level, black. And beneath it, a report dated nearly a decade ago. He hesitated, then clicked. The screen lit up with grainy images, photos, satellite footage, mission transcripts. Operation Lightwake, Kandahar Province, 2016. At age 19, she'd been attached to a special tactics squad running intel relays behind enemy lines. No helmet in the photos, just her, headset coiled around her neck, eyes locked on a target with the intensity of someone twice her age. She wasn't support. She was embedded. And by 22, she wasn't just running with the squad. She was leading them. Then came the last file. Redacted, mostly. A field op team compromised. Radio blackout. The log ended abruptly, but Reese's gut twisted at the final note. Subject Wolf, assumed Kia. Reappeared 3 days later with 6 injured operatives and intel payload intact. Declined debrief. Requested silence. The rest was buried. Reese slammed the folder shut and sat there, hands clenched, realizing that the girl he'd mocked for coffee was the reason at least a dozen men were breathing. Back on the flight line, Arden was alone under the wing of a fuel-heavy A-10, checking something by hand, not trusting the tech. That's when the colonel approached, slow and deliberate. "Thought you weren't coming back," he said. She didn't look up. "I didn't." He nodded like he understood, because maybe he did. He'd served long enough to know what kind of ghosts came home from blacklist assignments. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. Her voice was steel. "No, but I wasn't ready the first time either." That night, Reese tried to talk to her. Not to apologize, not exactly, but to understand. He found her in the barracks lounge, reading a dog-eared field manual with the same focus someone else might read a love letter. "So you're the ghost of Kandahar, huh?" he asked, leaning in the doorway. She looked up, expression unreadable. "Is that what they're calling me now? That, or coffee girl? Depends who you ask." He grinned, trying to disarm her. She didn't blink. "You think this is a joke?" she asked. "You think I came back to make friends?" Reese shifted uncomfortably. "I think you came back with something to prove." "No," she said quietly. "I came back because someone has to clean up the mess the rest of you won't admit exists." Her words weren't cruel, but they were cutting. Not just because they were true, but because Reese knew, deep down, that he'd been one of the people who helped bury whatever truth she was chasing now. "You could have stayed retired," he said. "No one would have blamed you." "They already blamed me once," she replied, "and it almost cost my entire squad their lives." The conversation ended there, not because she walked away, but because Reese didn't have anything else to say. The next morning, they were back in Hangar 4. Arden didn't speak during pre-op. She just listened, watched, calculated. Reese noticed she tapped her fingers in a rhythm when people lied. 3 slow, 1 quick. By the time the final plan was drawn, she'd rewritten half the route, moved the exfil zone, and recalibrated for wind drift most analysts would have missed. No one argued this time. Even Reese held his tongue. But something in his gut told him this mission, routine on paper, wasn't going to stay routine. And he wasn't wrong. Because 30 minutes later, a secure ping hit the comms bay. New intel. Not from satellites. Not from drones. From Arden. She'd quietly activated an old backdoor encryption system last night, the kind no one had used since before she vanished. The data revealed something the brass hadn't expected: civilians on site, hostages, possible trafficking ring buried beneath a weapons depot. The mission was now a rescue op, and nobody was more prepared than the woman who hadn't slept in 36 hours. She stood by the tarmac as the team loaded up, gear tight, voice calm, her patch now catching the wind like a banner resurrected from history. The colonel approached one last time, lowering his voice. "You good, Wolf?" She adjusted her gloves and replied, "I'm better than I was last time." Reese watched her climb aboard, something tightening in his chest. Not jealousy, not fear. Respect, the kind that only shows up when you finally met someone who walks straighter through hell than you ever could. And as the engines roared to life and the sky opened wide ahead of them, one thing was now certain. This wasn't Arden Wolf's comeback. It was her revenge. There are moments in a soldier's life that never get written into the reports. Moments that exist only in heartbeats and scars, buried in the pause between orders and the echo after the last bullet falls. And this was one of them. The mission was supposed to be a simple strike and clear, the kind of op that gets rubber-stamped by intelligence and forgotten by breakfast. But the moment boots hit sand, nothing went to plan. The terrain was wrong, the compound was fortified, and the hostage intel was far worse than the briefing warned. Women and children shackled underground, the trafficker network operating under the guise of a weapons cache, with explosives laced into every corridor as insurance. Within minutes, Arden Wolf's instincts kicked in harder than the protocols ever could. She rerouted fire teams on the fly, using hand signals in total blackout, moving with the same eerie precision she had at 19. Even the greenest squad mates followed her without question. Captain Reese, meanwhile, had broken off on flank recon and gotten himself pinned after a surprise ambush collapsed his comms. His bird was hit, his gunner unconscious, and he was bleeding from a torn shoulder, crouched behind shattered stone and heat-slick steel as bullets pinged around him like angry wasps. For 5 minutes, he thought it was over. And then she came. Arden moved like smoke, silent, surgical, and impossibly fast, cutting through the chaos with 2 rookies on her 6 and a calmness that made the storm seem like background noise. "Stay down," she ordered, kneeling beside Reese and assessing his wound with a glance. "You're not dying in my mission report." Reese tried to speak, but words caught in his throat. Not from pain, but from shame. Because the woman he'd called Coffee Girl was now risking her life to pull him out of the fire. She hoisted him up without fanfare, directed the others to lay cover, and led them through a collapsing tunnel of debris and enemy fire toward the hostage hold. Every step mapped in her head before they even reached it. Inside the main chamber, she found them. 24 frightened eyes, chained and caged, rigged to blow if anyone tampered. Arden didn't hesitate. She called in her override codes, ancient but still valid, then rewired the charge triggers herself using a field kit that hadn't been touched in years. One of the younger pilots whispered, "How the hell does she know how to do this?" Reese answered, voice gravel and regret. "Because she's the one who designed half the systems we still use." Extraction came hard and fast, one shot from being too late. But Arden had already plotted the fallback routes, switching evac to a nearby dry riverbed where a Blackhawk could land under cover. The hostages were lifted first, the soldiers next, Arden last, always last. As she boarded, drenched in dust and blood and sweat, she didn't look heroic. She looked real, worn, human, and quietly unbreakable. Back at base, the debriefing room wasn't the same place she'd walked into with coffee days ago. Now, everyone stood when she entered. The colonel nodded, but didn't interrupt her silence. Even the analyst sat straighter. Arden placed her field notes on the table, dry and meticulous. No drama, no gloating, just facts. Reese, arm in a sling, stood nearby, watching her like a man who'd just met history and knew it. When the debrief ended, she turned to leave, but Reese stepped forward. "Wait," he said, louder than necessary, so the others would hear. "I was wrong about you." She paused, turned slightly. "You weren't wrong," she replied. "You just didn't look close enough." She walked out without another word. Later, someone found her alone by the airstrip, staring into the horizon with the kind of look only people who've buried friends understand. A younger recruit approached nervously. "Ma'am, if I may, why'd you come back?" "After everything." Arden didn't turn. Her voice was soft but anchored. "Because I didn't want the next girl who walked into a briefing room with answers to be laughed at for carrying coffee." The recruit blinked, nodded, and walked away with a little more spine than he'd had before. Word spread after that. About the woman with the ghost patch. About the hostages. About how she rewrote the mission in real time and pulled out a pilot who once mocked her in front of everyone. They started calling her Shadowhawk, though she never acknowledged it. She didn't need a title. She had her legacy. A week later, her duffel was gone from the locker. Her name, scrubbed again from the active roster. But a single sealed envelope remained, left on the colonel's desk. Inside was the patch, clean, ironed, and folded neatly in a Ziploc, along with a note, for the next one. Make sure they listen. And somewhere, in a quiet part of the archives rarely visited, a file once marked redacted was updated with a single sentence. Subject: Wolf. A. Proven asset. Zero hesitation. Mission complete. The system had tried to erase her. History had tried to forget her. But ghosts don't vanish. Not when they carry truth on their backs and redemption in their blood. And as for the legend of the coffee girl, well, no one would ever make that mistake again.